Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Basu and Godin Notebook on this Monday, May the 12th, 2025. The Stanley Cup playoffs are underway, are going on, Arpin, and we're not covering the playoff team anymore, but today we're going to deep dive into a position where the Canadiens need to get better if they want to go deep in the playoffs in the future. So I think it's the long-awaited second-line center extravaganza.
Yes. Maxime Paymas called it the three best words in the English language. So let's see if we can live up to that. It is an extravaganza. It's going to be, listen, both of us this is how we kind of do this sort of. We both kind of did our own thing, looking around the league, looking at how you can address this. And so now we're just going to kind of compare notes. That's kind of how the episode is going to go. And so we should start, in my opinion, with an actual conversation about the ideal center acquisition, which is obviously Sidney Crosby.
Right there, huh? Boom.
Might as well start with it. I mean, it's like, listen, it's it's starting to look somewhat realistic. Now, no one's actually asked Sidney Crosby about this, and I don't think he'd be saying so one way or the other, but it is, if Kyle Dubas is willing to go to Mike Sullivan and have the conversation that he had that led to Mike Sullivan leaving, you have to imagine he's going to have that conversation not only with Crosby, but probably with Evgeny Malkin, probably with Chris Letang. All different situations. Malkin has one season left on his contract. Is likely going to retire after that season. Crosby has 2 years left on his. Letang is kind of unmovable at this point, so as is to some extent Erik Karlsson. But it's clear what Kyle Dubas is trying to do in Pittsburgh. It would be not surprising if Sidney Crosby didn't want to end his career being part of a rebuild. So what are the chances, and what would it take for the Canadiens to lure him to Montreal? That's the question, and a lot of it depends on how Sidney Crosby handles this whole thing. Now, this entire discussion is based on the assumption that Sidney Crosby says, "Okay, I'm going to go finish my career somewhere else." And what's important to Sidney Crosby at that point, because he has all the cards, he controls where he goes, he's a full no move, as he should. So does he tell Kyle Dubas that I want to fulfill my childhood dream like John Tavares did and go play for the Canadiens and finish my career there? Does he say I want to win more cups? Those are basically the two options as far as I could tell, and those lead to different scenarios. And the other thing being, does Sidney Crosby give Kyle Dubas one team and say, go make a deal with that team and really handcuff the GM in Pittsburgh and really make it so that he can't get as good of a return as if he created a little bit of a bidding war. So those are kind of the parameters that we're dealing with, but it's all under the assumption that Sidney Crosby even wants to leave, which it should be noted, has repeatedly stated on multiple occasions that he has no interest in leaving the Pittsburgh Penguins and would like to finish his career wearing a Pittsburgh Penguins jersey. So right from the get-go, all of this is unlikely.
Well, your colleague at The Athletic, Josh Yeo, wrote only a couple of days ago, it's still unlikely that he requests a trade even after Mike Sullivan left.
Yeah. So it's very unlikely. But I think if Josh Yeo had written that a year ago, he would have said there's no chance Sidney Crosby would request a trade. So to call it somewhat unlikely means there's probably, I don't think Kyle Dubas is going to force this on Sidney Crosby, but if he presents to Crosby and say, this is what I plan on doing, are you in? It wouldn't be shocking for him to think like, okay, well, maybe not. Maybe this isn't for me. And so I don't know, but
Yeah.
Is Montreal a realistic destination? If in the unlikely event that happens, do you think Montreal is going to be a real player in this?
Well, there are many questions in what you just brought up.
There's a lot of conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you think the Sean Monahan trade had lots of conditions, this has lots of conditions because, again, cannot stress this enough. It is unlikely that Sidney Crosby is going to want to leave Pittsburgh. Everyone should keep that in mind.
Yeah. That's the ultimate disclaimer. Look, if he wants to win another cup, it's hard to find and identify a cup contender that would provide him in the window of the next 2 years a guaranteed cup. There's no such thing as that. No. Right now, the Florida Panthers are the closest thing to it. But, in the world of rampant speculation, Crosby has been tied to the Colorado Avalanche because of Nathan MacKinnon. Mm-hmm. And the Avalanche was quickly ousted of this year's playoffs. So, yep. And the Montreal Canadiens, one thing that we can honestly say is that push that they made in the second half of the season and the fact that they made the playoffs this year compared to maybe next year or even the year after is that they clearly give the signal or give the impression to the rest of the league that they're a team that's on the rise. And they're not just treading water or they're still years away. So I think that there's a level of excitement, not just for Crosby, but for any player who's Habs curious to say, oh, okay, well, you know what? If I was to join that team, they're definitely trending in the right direction. And it's not just a look at their prospect list. It's also what they've been doing on the ice. We have tangible results. So this is, I think, the encouraging part from the Montreal side of arguments and from the profile that the Canadiens can present to Crosby. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that if the Canadiens were to go that way, they would have to go to Kyle Dubas and really give him an offer he couldn't refuse and force him to go to Sid. And then Sid would have to say, just stop bothering me with those things. I'm staying here. So don't come again and ask me, I've got this offer from that team. No, I want to stay in Pittsburgh. That's end of the story. But if there's an opening, if the offer that you propose to Pittsburgh is so enticing that discussion starts between the GM and his star captain, then it means that you've got something good going. And so as much as it is, I understand your argument that if he was to request a trade, he would have the control of the destination. Hence, he would probably mitigate the results or the return that the Penguins could get for him. I think that there's also the responsibility of a team who's interested in Crosby enforcing the issue. And by doing so, saying, you know what, we're going to give you really an offer that we will force you and your GM to consider because we're really interested in you. Now, what shape could that take? It's hard to tell, but this is for a team that's going into a rebuild like the Pittsburgh Penguins. There is no doubt that the Canadiens have plenty of interesting items, but Crosby is the most exciting possibility. He's the most spectacular acquisition. It could propel the Canadiens to contender status immediately. But the question I have, though,
would it though? Would it be a Stanley Cup contender?
From an offensive aspect, it would propel the Canadiens' offense. I think they would become a very serious team. If you doubt it, why do it? If you don't think that they're going to be, why do you even bother paying a top price for a guy who's got 2 years left on the deal. It's because he would bring you into that sphere. But at the same time,
also would be the ultimate,
defense,
just the ultimate bridge player, right? I mean, it's like, yes, it would.
Yeah.
I mean,
know, but at the same time, you could argue, is the defense ready for the aspirations that the forward group would provide, and what sort of assets do you give so that in 2 years after that if you spend it all on Crosby, you don't fall off a cliff after those 2 years. So it looks exciting, but would it be the smartest thing to do in the long term? I'm not sure.
Well, when you talk about the defense, right? I mean, you look at the group of defensemen. So let's say Sid does decide he wants to leave Pittsburgh and gives Dubas a group of teams. Some of them cup contender. I mean, you mentioned Florida. They might lose Sam Bennett.
Yeah.
He might say, like, I'll just go to Florida and be like their new Sam Bennett. Like it's obviously not the same type of player, but anyhow, just talking about a hole that he could fill. Colorado, ever since Nazem Kadri left, has been looking for a second line center. Every year they get one at the deadline and try and give it a go. And so that's a perfectly natural spot for Sid to slot in there. And then there's some teams that we're not considering because there's no tie to Sid necessarily. But if his desire is to go win a cup, like Dallas, Tampa, there's places he could go that would give him a pretty good shot at winning a cup with a bunch of players around him that are in a more similar situation to him than Montreal, for instance, or a bunch of other teams. No doubt about that.
Yes.
So, but he could be like, listen, I'll put all these cup contenders and I'll put Montreal because I wouldn't mind going there. They have a good thing going and I'd get to play in the Bell Center, blah, 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 pajamas, whatever. And so, there's no doubt that of the teams that I mentioned or of the teams that he might give Pittsburgh the right to negotiate with, there are a few teams, if any, on that list that could compete in terms of what they can offer with Montreal in terms of picks, but the thing is I think it would take in that kind of a scenario where there's other options that Dubas can work with. Because you talk about the defense being ready, I think you'd have to pluck one of those defensemen out, one of those promising young defensemen. I feel pretty safe saying that Hudson's not going anywhere. But like Goulet, would Pittsburgh want Goulet? Probably. Would Montreal give a hard no on Goulet? Like what you just said, this is a short-term arrangement. Goulet's a long-term piece of the core. Would they be willing to sacrifice that? Do they have the depth in their pipeline to account for that? But on the other hand, you're adding Sidney Crosby and everything that he brings and exposing your young players to this guy for 2 years. Like there's a lot of pros and cons to be weighed. Like if you were to say, we'll give you the 16th and 17th pick and Goulet for Sidney Crosby, like, is that a smart thing for the Canadiens to do? I mean, it would definitely suit the Penguins' needs. Like they've actually stockpiled.
That wouldn't be enough. It's still Sidney Crosby, man.
You don't think that would be enough for 2 years of Sid?
No.
You're getting a top four defenseman in his prime and 2 first-round picks.
But they're not 2 top 10 picks. They're 16.
Well, you're not going to get top 10 picks. That's what I'm telling you, is that if you're dealing with all these cup contenders, you're not getting top 10 picks back.